Daniel pressed a cloth napkin into my hand at a steakhouse on Broadway and whispered, "Try not to embarrass us tonight." What he didn't know was simple. The company stitched on his blazer pocket, the one paying him $280,000 a year, was mine. Let me back up, because men like Daniel rarely become cruel all at once. They build it slowly, one assumption at a time. And if stories about quiet people being measured by the wrong standards mean something to you, stay with me here on K1, because some lessons only land when pride finally meets the truth it's been mocking. My name is not the sort people remember after one meeting. I have always preferred it that way. For most of my life, I found that if you dress plainly, speak softly, and drive an old car, people tell you exactly what they think of you. They do not guard themselves. They do not polish their character. They show you the raw boards under the paint. Daniel had been married to my daughter Lauren for 6 years. And in all that time, he never once asked me the one question that might have saved him a great deal of shame. He never asked how a man who did not appear to work could afford to live without asking anybody for help. He saw what he wanted to see. He saw me at cheap diners. He saw me in the same 3 shirts at Thanksgiving, Christmas, and the occasional birthday dinner. He saw me driving a 12-year-old Toyota with a clean interior and no vanity plate. He saw a man who clipped coupons because he liked precision, not because he needed rescue, and he translated that into weakness, because that was the only language he respected. Lauren was different. Lauren had known since she was 23 that I had money, though even she did not know the full shape of it until later. I never hid it from her out of shame. I hid it because wealth turns every relationship into a test unless you keep it out of the room. I founded Mercer Allied Systems 31 years ago with 2 leased rooms, a borrowed conference table, and an accounts receivable problem that nearly killed us in the second winter. I kept controlling interest when everyone told me to diversify faster. I still own 67% of the shares. These days I sit on the board, choose my moments carefully, and let younger men strut through hallways they think history built for them. Daniel was one of those younger men, smart, polished, ambitious, handsome in the way magazines like, and always faintly performing for an audience no one else could see. He had worked at Mercer for 10 years. By all public appearances, he had earned his climb. Senior leadership liked him. He carried himself well. He knew how to fill a room with phrases like strategic alignment and leadership visibility. He was being considered for a promotion that would move him into a more exposed executive role. I knew that before he did, because one of the privileges of owning 67% of a company is that confidential conversations tend to reach your desk before they reach anyone else's ego. I had said nothing, not because I wanted leverage over him, because I wanted to see what kind of man he would be when he believed no leverage existed. For 6 years, the signs came in small cuts, never enough for Lauren to call it cruelty, never loud enough for outsiders to notice. At family dinners, he would clap me on the shoulder and say things like, "Good thing Lauren has me, right?" As though I were a retired mechanic living off her kindness. When restaurant bills came, he would reach for them too quickly, then glance at me with that polished little smile men wear when they want witnesses to their generosity. Once, at a Sunday lunch, he asked whether I'd ever thought about finding something part-time so I wouldn't get bored at my age. I remember stirring my coffee and saying, "No, Daniel, I've never struggled with filling my time." He laughed as if I had made a joke. I had not. The worst part was not Daniel. It was what he licensed in other people. Once a man is framed as lesser, the room begins to treat him as public property. Daniel's friends addressed me with that syrupy patience reserved for the harmless and irrelevant. A neighbor of his asked whether I was comfortable financially these days. Lauren heard that one and bristled, but I touched her wrist and changed the subject. I had learned many years earlier that immediate correction satisfies pride, but delayed truth reveals character. Daniel mistook my restraint for dependence. That was his first real mistake. His second was involving his parents. They lived in Connecticut and had not met me in person during the 6 years of Daniel and Lauren's marriage. There had always been some conflict, some holiday shuffle, some excuse about weather, schedules, or logistics. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, Lauren called and told me Daniel had arranged a dinner on Broadway for Friday night because his parents were flying in from Connecticut and thought it was time we all sat down together properly. Her tone was hopeful. She wanted harmony. Lauren had inherited her mother's optimism and my habit of believing people could still choose better if given one more chance. "Please come," she said. "I know Daniel can be a lot, but I want them to know you." I nearly declined. Something in the timing bothered me. Daniel had been more attentive than usual that month, more polished, almost buoyant. The pending promotion would explain some of that, but not all of it. There was a shape to his sudden warmth that felt rehearsed. Then she added quietly, "It would mean a lot to me, Dad." So I said yes. Friday afternoon, I stood in my closet, looking at the navy sport coat I reserve for board meetings, where I prefer not to be recognized until the meeting starts. Then I put it back. I chose a charcoal jacket over a plain dark t-shirt. Clean lines, good shoes, no watch anyone would comment on, no cufflinks, no signals. I was not going there to perform wealth. I was going there to observe what happened when people believed they were safe enough to be honest. On the drive into the city, traffic thickened near Broadway, and the sky took on that steel grey colour New York wears when it cannot decide whether to rain or glare. I parked a block away and walked the rest, slow and steady, passing windows full of expensive things sold to people desperate to prove they belonged near expensive things. Daniel was already inside when I arrived. I saw him through the glass before he saw me, standing near the host stand in a blazer, with the Mercer Allied Systems logo stitched discreetly on the pocket. He touched the receptionist's elbow as he spoke, smiling too broadly, glancing toward the door every few seconds. Lauren was beside him, elegant and nervous, smoothing the edge of her sleeve the way she had done as a child before piano recitals. When Daniel finally spotted me, his eyes dropped first to my jacket, then to my shoes, then to my face. It was a quick inventory, evaluation. He stepped forward with a grin that looked friendly from across the room and brittle from 2 feet away. Then he handed me the cloth napkin, leaned close enough for only me to hear, and whispered, "Try not to embarrass us tonight." His parents arrived less than a minute later, carrying Connecticut in the way some people carry old money, not through grace but through certainty. His father, Richard, was silver-haired and narrow-eyed, with the kind of tan that comes from paying other people to maintain a view. His mother, Evelyn, wore pearls the size of marbles and smiled at me as if she had already been briefed on my limitations. Lauren made introductions, warm and earnest, and I watched both of them take me in with almost admirable efficiency. Jacket, t-shirt, no visible watch worth noting, no outward sign of usefulness. "So good to finally meet you," Evelyn said, taking only my fingers instead of my full hand. "We've heard so much." "I hope only half of it was true," I said. Richard gave a short laugh, the kind men offer when they want to acknowledge wit without surrendering status. We were shown to a corner table under a brass light fixture that cast everyone in flattering amber except the person being examined. That person, I knew almost immediately, was me. Daniel took the seat beside Lauren and across from me, a positioning choice that gave him control of the conversation. Richard sat at the head nearest the aisle. Evelyn settled beside him and opened the menu without really reading it. She was too interested in the live entertainment, me. For the first 10 minutes they performed politeness with the discipline of people who believed manners could disguise motive. They asked whether I liked the city, whether Broadway had changed over the years, whether I still lived in the same house. I answered plainly and without apology. Then the questions narrowed. "And what line of work were you in?" Richard asked, folding his hands beside the wine list. "Were, not are, a burial choice." "Technology and industrial systems," I said, "for a long time." "Retired now?" Evelyn asked. "In the formal sense, yes." Daniel jumped in before I could continue. "Mr. Mercer enjoys the quiet life." He smiled at his mother as if translating me into a gentler language. "Lauren says he hates fuss." Mr. Mercer, not Dad, not even Harold, which I had offered years ago and which he had never used. Always something tidy and distancing, something appropriate for a man who had never decided whether I was family or furniture. "That sounds peaceful," Evelyn said. "These days it's a blessing if a person can simplify." I nodded. "It is." The waiter came, poured water, and Daniel ordered a bottle of red without consulting anyone. Richard approved with a glance that told me more about their family structure than any story Lauren had ever shared. Daniel did not merely want his father's approval, he organized himself around it. That explained more than the ambition. It explained the need to stage people, to sort them, to keep every table arranged in a hierarchy he could survive. Once the menus were closed, Richard leaned back and asked, "And has retirement treated you well financially?" Lauren looked up at once. "Richard." "What?" he said, smiling at her as if she were overly sensitive. "It's practical. Families should be able to discuss practical things." Daniel kept his eyes on his glass. He did not stop it. That mattered. "I've been treated fairly well," I said. Evelyn tilted her head. "Lauren said you always like to live simply." "I do." "That's admirable," she said, with the exact tone people use when they mean manageable. Daniel finally joined in. "He's very low maintenance." He said it lightly, but he was watching me when he said it, waiting to see whether I would flinch. I did not. "That's one way to put it," I said. Lauren's shoulders tightened. She knew the sound of him when he drifted from teasing into display. "Dad's always been independent," she said. "He's never asked anyone for anything." Richard gave a slow nod. "That's good. Pride is important in a man." Then he added, "Although sometimes accepting help is the wiser move." There it was. Not the insult itself, the architecture of it. The table was being built toward a conclusion, and I could feel each polite question acting as a nail. I cut into my steak and let the silence stretch just long enough to make them own it. Daniel mistook silence for weakness again. "I've told them you're private," he said. "They just want to understand the situation." The situation? Lauren turned to him. "What situation?" He smiled at her too quickly. "Babe, come on, we're all adults." Evelyn reached across the table and touched Lauren's wrist with the practiced gentleness of a woman who had spent years dressing coercion in silk. "No one's criticizing your father. We're thinking long-term, about stability, about how families protect each other." Families protect each other. Interesting phrase, especially when spoken like a prelude to exclusion. Richard sipped his wine and looked at me directly for the first time that night. "Daniel is on a serious path. I'm sure Lauren's told you that." "She's mentioned he's doing well." Daniel tried to look modest and landed somewhere near smug. Richard continued, "More than well. He's being looked at for a major step up, executive-level visibility, the kind of thing that changes a man's entire trajectory." "That can happen," I said. "And with that," Richard said, "comes a certain level of scrutiny." Lauren set her fork down. "What does that have to do with my father?" No one answered her immediately. That silence answered enough. Daniel finally did what weak men often do when they want cruelty to seem reasonable. He lowered his voice. "This isn't an attack." "Then why does it sound like one?" Lauren asked. Evelyn gave her that same patient smile. "Darling, no one is saying your father has done anything wrong. But perception matters. Daniel's entering rooms where background is discussed, family is discussed, optics are discussed." "Optics," I repeated. "That's a useful word. It can hide a lot of ugly ideas." Richard's smile thinned. "Or it can describe reality." Lauren looked at Daniel now, fully, with the beginning of disbelief. "Did you invite my father here for this?" "For a conversation," he said. "A necessary one." "Necessary for whom?" she asked. He inhaled through his nose, annoyed now that the evening had refused to remain under glass. "Lauren, don't make this dramatic." I almost laughed. Men who build staged humiliations always call the response dramatic when the stage catches fire. I cut another bite, chewed, swallowed, and dabbed my mouth with the cloth napkin Daniel had handed me at the door. It amused me more than it should have that he had supplied the prop himself. Richard leaned in slightly. Let me be plain. Daniel has worked 10 years for everything he has. He earns, what is it now? He looked to Daniel. About 280. Daniel nodded once. 280,000. Richard turned back to me. A $280,000 salary at his age is not common. It places him in a world where distractions can become liabilities. Lauren's face changed at that. Not anger first, hurt, because now she could hear it clearly. Her husband had not brought her father to dinner to bond. He had brought him to be sorted, priced, and possibly removed. Distractions, I said. That's another useful word. Daniel set his glass down. Look, nobody's trying to disrespect you. No? I asked. Then this is a strangely organized compliment. Evelyn exhaled, as if I were making everyone's work harder by not collapsing on cue. You must understand how this looks from our side. A man living modestly, no obvious income, same car for years, same habits. Leaning quietly on his daughter's household, while Daniel rises into a more public tier. Lauren pushed back from the table so sharply her chair legs scraped the floor. Heads turned from nearby tables. He has never leaned on us, she said. Not once. Daniel's jaw tightened. Sit down, Lauren. Wrong move. Not because of tone alone, but because it revealed instinct. Control first, truth later. Lauren remained standing for another heartbeat, staring at him as if she were seeing an unfamiliar arrangement of bones beneath a familiar face. Then slowly she sat, but not because he told her to, because she wanted to hear how far he would go. I knew that look. Her mother had worn it once in a lawyer's office 27 years ago. Richard reached inside his jacket. The motion was small, almost casual, but every person at that table felt the shift. He drew out a long cream envelope and placed it beside his bread plate without opening it yet. Daniel did not look surprised. That was the moment the room changed for me. Everything before it had been ugly but deniable. This was planning. This was choreography. Lauren stared at the envelope, then at Daniel. What is that? Daniel answered too quickly. Just something to help. Help who? She asked. Evelyn spoke softly. Your father. Lauren looked at me then, and I gave her the only kindness I could in that moment. Steadiness. No flinch, no visible wound. Children suffer twice when a parent is humiliated, once from the insult and once from the panic of seeing the parent break. I would give her neither. Richard slid the envelope an inch across the table, but kept 2 fingers resting on it, as though the money itself required supervision. $5,000, he said. Enough to make a transition easier. A transition to what? I asked. Daniel finally met my eyes, and for the first time that night he let the mask slip. What showed beneath it was not hatred, it was embarrassment. Embarrassment that I existed in a form he could not market. Maybe Florida, he said with a dry little laugh. Maybe somewhere quieter, somewhere cheaper, just a reset. Lauren turned on him. Are you hearing yourself? Evelyn tried again for velvet authority. No one means this cruelly. We're saying that if Daniel's career is about to expand, certain boundaries may be healthy. Public events, company dinners, networking spaces, there's no shame in a more private life. Richard nudged the envelope forward another inch. Take it as dignity, not charity. I looked down at the envelope. $5,000. That was the price they had put on my disappearance, on 6 years of contempt distilled into paper and passed between wine glasses under a brass light on Broadway. $5,000 to stay out of their son's career. $5,000 from people who did not know I could have bought the restaurant, the building, and perhaps half the block without checking the close. I placed my knife and fork together on the plate. Precise. Quiet. Daniel noticed. So did Lauren. My hand went into my jacket, and for one hopeful second, Daniel seemed to think I might actually take the envelope. Instead, I took out my phone and set it beside the bread plate. I agree with one thing, I said. Boundaries are healthy. Daniel frowned. Richard's fingers stayed on the envelope. Evelyn stopped smiling. Lauren did not move at all. And I think, I said, picking up the phone, it's time we establish a few. I unlocked the phone, scrolled once, and called the only person in the company who never wasted syllables. Martin Hale had been our CFO for 11 years. He did not impress easily, did not flatter anyone, and did not pick up social calls after 8, unless he believed the caller mattered more than the inconvenience. The line rang once, twice. Then his voice came on, calm and alert. Martin Hale. I kept my eyes on the envelope when I spoke. Martin, it's Harold Mercer. There are moments when sound changes the temperature of a room. That was one of them. Daniel's expression did not collapse all at once. First came confusion, then recognition that he should already understand what was happening and somehow did not. Then a stillness so complete it looked borrowed. Across from me, Richard's fingers lifted off the envelope. Evelyn's mouth parted slightly, no longer smiling, no longer even pretending to conduct the evening. Martin answered at once. Yes, sir. I let the silence sit for half a heartbeat, not for drama, but because I wanted every person at that table to hear the part Daniel had never imagined. Not friendliness, not uncertainty, deference earned over years. I'm sorry to bother you on a Friday night, I said, but I need to confirm something while I have context in front of me. Of course, sir, Daniel swallowed. Lauren turned slowly toward me, and I watched realization begin at the edges of her face. Not complete understanding yet, just the first shape of it. The waiter approached with a side dish, sensed something in the air, and retreated without setting it down. Even the restaurant seemed to lean away. Daniel Whitaker, I said evenly. He is still under consideration for the pending promotion, correct? Martin did not hesitate. Yes, sir, final review is next week. Richard stared at me as if the language itself had betrayed him. He knew enough about business to hear what Daniel was hearing. Pending promotion. Final review. Not rumor, not bluff, internal process, real authority. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it again, then looked at the Mercer Allied Systems logo stitched on his own blazer pocket as though it had been placed there by a stranger. I continued. Please note for now that the review is to be frozen until I finish a personal assessment. Martin paused exactly long enough to understand that this was deliberate and serious. Understood, sir. Do you want me to inform HR and hold the paperwork? Yes, I said. No communication goes out until I say otherwise. Yes, sir. By then Daniel's face had gone pale in layers, not white all at once, first around the mouth, then behind the eyes, then across the forehead as the blood seemed to leave him, one realization at a time. Lauren pressed a hand flat against the tablecloth, grounding herself. Dad, she said softly, and there was no accusation in it, only shock. Richard finally found his voice, but it came out thinner than before. Who exactly is this? I raised one finger to him without looking away from the phone. He fell silent. Men like Richard are not used to being paused. Martin, I said, one more thing. Who still holds controlling interest in Mercer Allied Systems? This time there was the faintest change in Martin's tone, not uncertainty, but awareness that this answer was not for me. It was for whoever was listening beside me. You do, sir. 67%. Evelyn made a sound then, not quite a gasp, not quite a word. Daniel's hand moved to his glass, missed it, and stopped halfway, fingers hanging in the air like a broken decision. Thank you, I said. Enjoy your evening. You too, sir. I ended the call and placed the phone back on the table with more gentleness than Daniel had shown me all night. No one touched their food. No one reached for wine. Broadway still moved outside beyond the dark glass. Cabs and reflections and strangers rushing through their own lives. But at our table, time had narrowed to a point sharp enough to pierce everything false. Daniel stared at me. You own Mercer? He said, but the question was already dead when it left his mouth. I founded it 31 years ago, I said. and I still own 67%. Richard blinked twice, quickly, as if his eyes might rearrange what they were seeing if given another chance. "That's impossible," he said. "No," I answered. "What's impossible is believing a man's bank account can be measured by the age of his Toyota." Lauren's gaze moved from me to Daniel with a pain so clean it made the whole table feel exposed. "You knew enough about Dad to mock him," she said quietly, "but not enough to ask a single real question." Daniel looked at her, then at me, then at the envelope. He seemed unable to decide which humiliation to address first. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked me. His voice had dropped into that strange register people use when the ground disappears and they want to blame gravity. "Because it was never my job to rescue you from your assumptions," I said. "You had 6 years." Evelyn tried to gather herself. She straightened her spine, touched one pearl earring, and reached instinctively for tone, the way frightened people reach for ritual. "Surely this is all a misunderstanding," she said. "We were only trying to protect Daniel's future." "By offering me $5,000 to disappear from it?" I asked. She had no answer ready for plain language. Richard attempted a different tactic. "If Daniel had known—" "That's the point," I said. "He didn't know, because he never cared to know." Daniel flinched harder at that than he had at Martin's "yes, sir." The reason was simple. Public power injures pride, but accurate description injures identity. He was not just hearing that I owned the company. He was hearing what kind of man he had revealed himself to be before he knew it. Lauren turned toward him fully now. "You invited my father here to humiliate him." "Lauren, no." Her voice sharpened for the first time that night. "Don't do that. Don't shrink it. You brought your parents in from Connecticut, sat us down on Broadway, let them ask him about money like he was some burden, and then you let your father slide an envelope across the table like he was paying off a problem." Daniel looked at his parents, perhaps hoping one of them might reclaim control of the narrative. Neither did. Richard had gone rigid. Evelyn kept both hands folded in her lap now, a posture of forced composure that only made her look smaller. "It wasn't supposed to go like this," Daniel said. I almost smiled at the sentence. It was, in its own accidental way, the most honest thing he had said all evening. "No," I told him. "It was supposed to go the way these scenes usually go. You expected a quiet old man to feel lucky you were polite while you priced his exit." The envelope still sat between us, cream-colored, thick, obscene in its smallness. I pushed it back across the table with one finger until it stopped against Richard's plate. "Keep it," I said. "If $5,000 is what dignity costs in your world, you're poorer than I thought." Daniel put both hands on the table now, as if he needed proof something solid still existed. "Please," he said, and there it was at last, the first crack in the performance. "Please don't do this over one dinner." "One dinner?" Lauren repeated, staring at him as though she hardly recognized the architecture of his mind. "This dinner only exposed what was already there." I looked at Daniel and thought, not for the first time, how strange ambition becomes when it is built on contempt. He had climbed for 10 years at Mercer Allied Systems, learning org charts, mastering presentation decks, memorizing the language of leadership, and at no point had it occurred to him that the quiet man at family holidays might be the same man whose name still sat inside the legal spine of the company. Not because I hid in shame, because I had the luxury not to announce myself. Daniel mistook silence for vacancy. That mistake was now costing him more than the promotion. It was costing him the version of himself Lauren had believed in. He turned to me again. "I love your daughter." "Then you've had a poor way of showing respect to her family." He rubbed one hand over his mouth. "I can fix this." "No," Lauren said before I could answer. "You can't talk your way out of what you meant." Her eyes were wet now, but her voice held. I was proud of her in that moment, though pride was not the clean word for it. It was something older, the recognition that a child has finally stopped bargaining with what hurts them. Richard rose halfway from his chair, then sat again. His instincts were fighting each other: confront, retreat, deny, recalculate. Men who have always believed themselves superior often become physically awkward the first time the script rejects them. Mr. Mercer, he said, and his use of the name was different now, heavy with forced respect. Perhaps we should continue this privately. This became private the moment you tried to purchase my absence, I said. What you're feeling now is simply consequence arriving in public. Daniel closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, he looked older. Not wiser, just suddenly stripped of polish. Are you really freezing the promotion? I already did. Because of my parents? Because of you, I said. Your parents just made your thinking visible. No one spoke after that. The brass light overhead hummed softly. Plates cooled. Somewhere near the bar, a woman laughed too loudly at something unrelated, and the sound felt almost cruel in its normalcy. I reached for my water, took a measured sip, and set the glass down. Then I looked at Lauren. I'm going to leave in a minute, I said. You don't have to come with me if you're not ready. She nodded once, eyes still on Daniel. I'm not staying long. Daniel seemed to understand then, not all of it, but enough. The promotion was frozen, the company was mine. The poor man at the table was not poor. And the worst part, the part that would haunt him later, was that none of this had been hidden behind locked doors or secret offshore accounts or false names. It had been available all along to anyone humble enough to ask a real question and decent enough to listen to the answer. I stood slowly, not with anger, not with triumph, but with the kind of calm that makes frightened people understand there will be no easy way back to where they were 5 minutes earlier. I reached into my wallet, pulled out $200 bills, and set them beside the untouched bread plate. Enough to cover my portion, the tax, and an insultingly generous share of the service. I've always believed that if you leave a table after someone has tried to diminish you, you leave it cleaner than they do. Richard watched the money hit the cloth and looked almost offended by the precision of it. Evelyn said nothing. She had gone past words and into damage assessment. Daniel rose halfway as though he meant to stop me, then seemed to remember all at once that the ground beneath his career was no longer theoretical. Harold, he said. I looked at him. No. Tonight you can use my name correctly or not at all. He froze. Lauren closed her eyes for a moment, and I could see the hurt moving through her in waves, not because she had learned something terrible about me, but because she had learned something accurate about him. There is no clean way for a daughter to watch the man she married become smaller in real time. Dad, she said softly, I'll call you later. I nodded. Take your time. Then I looked once at Richard and Evelyn. You're both banned from every Mercer Allied Systems event, effective immediately. Public receptions, holiday functions, donor dinners, board-related gatherings, vendor conferences, anything hosted under company invitation. If your names appear on a guest list, they come off. Richard's mouth opened. You can't possibly... I can, I said, and I will. He had no answer to that. Men like him often imagine power as a performance of voice. They do not recognize it when it arrives as administration. Evelyn finally found enough breath to speak. This is excessive. No, I said. Excessive was flying in from Connecticut to help your son stage a buyout of my dignity for $5,000. Daniel whispered, Please. I turned back to him. You will keep your job. All 4 of them looked at me then, even Richard, because mercy confuses people more than punishment when they know they have earned the latter. I'm not interested in theatrics, I said. I'm interested in standards. Your job remains yours for now. Your promotion does not. Daniel stared as if he had expected annihilation and had not prepared for measured judgment. Why? He asked. Because losing a title teaches less than living under a ceiling you built with your own conduct, I said. You need to understand exactly why you are staying where you are. Lauren's eyes filled again, but this time there was something else in them too. Relief, perhaps, that I had not chosen the most brutal option available to me. Or maybe sorrow that restraint was required at all between people who should have been family. I adjusted my jacket, picked up the cloth napkin Daniel had handed me at the door, folded it once, and placed it beside my water glass. A small thing, but some endings deserve symmetry. Then I stepped away from the table and walked toward the front of the restaurant. No one followed me immediately. I could feel the stillness behind me, that rare silence that settles when everyone in a room understands the script has been ripped out of their hands. Outside, Broadway was cold and restless. The air had sharpened while we were inside, and the wet smell of pavement rose from the curb where a taxi had just pulled away. I stood there for a few seconds, letting the city wash the room off me. Neon reflected in puddles. A delivery cyclist swore at a driver. Somewhere down the block, a saxophone was trying to turn noise into music. It occurred to me, not for the first time, that humiliation always feels enormous from the inside, and strangely ordinary from the street. The world keeps moving. Your private disaster is still just one table under one light in one city full of strangers. My driver's seat was cold when I got back into the Toyota. I rested both hands on the wheel, but did not start the engine right away. I thought about Lauren at that table, about the exact moment her face changed when the envelope appeared, about the cost of clarity. Parents spend years wanting to protect their children from pain, then spend the next decades learning that some pain is simply the fee for seeing the truth before it can do worse damage. 23 minutes later, my phone lit up with her name, Lauren. I answered on the first ring. For a second she said nothing, and I could hear only the soft static of movement on her end, maybe an elevator, maybe a hallway, maybe the inside of some borrowed silence after leaving the restaurant. Then she exhaled. What happened? It was not a literal question. She had been there. She had seen everything. What she meant was something deeper and far more exhausted. What happened to the man I married? What happened to the version of our life I thought I understood? You saw what happened, I said gently. No, she whispered. I saw the end of it. I don't think I saw the beginning. I leaned back against the seat. Traffic glowed red ahead of me through the windshield. The beginning, I said, was 6 years of him deciding what I was worth without ever asking who I was. She was quiet again. Then, he said he thought he was helping. I let out a breath through my nose. People say that when the truth sounds uglier than their intention. His parents were unbelievable. His parents, I said, simply said their part out loud. That landed. I could tell by the silence that followed. Lauren had always been quick, but grief slows the smartest people because they are suddenly sorting memory into new piles. What was love? What was ambition? What was habit? What was performance? Did you really freeze the promotion? She asked after a while. Yes. And he still keeps his job? Yes. She gave a small, incredulous laugh that broke halfway into something else. You're being kinder than I feel. That won't always be true, I said. Tonight doesn't need your permanent emotions, just your honest ones. I heard a door close on her end, then a softer room tone. She had reached somewhere private. He kept saying he didn't know, she said, that he didn't know you owned Mercer, that he didn't know any of this. That's exactly the problem. My voice stayed level, but I could feel the old steel in it now, the part of me that built companies when men twice my age thought I was too soft-spoken to survive a quarter. Not knowing isn't an excuse when the ignorance is built from arrogance. He never asked because he thought he already had the answer. She let that sit for a few seconds. Are you going to fire him later? No. Not ever? Not for tonight alone, I said. He'll make his own future from here. Either he learns or he confirms what tonight suggested. But I'm not turning Mercer Allied Systems into a stage for family revenge. She inhaled shakily. I'm sorry. That one hurt more than anything from the restaurant. Not because I needed the apology, but because children apologize for fractures they didn't create when they still love two people standing on opposite sides of a break. Lauren, I said more firmly now, you have nothing to apologize for. I brought you there. You brought me to dinner. They brought the envelope. She made a soft sound that could have been a laugh or a sob, maybe both. Are you okay? She asked. There was tenderness in it now, daughter to father, stripped of all the noise that had surrounded us for hours. Yes, I said, I'm fine. And I was, not untouched, not pleased, but fine. There is a difference older people learn if life gives them enough years. Disrespect can wound you, but it does not get to define you unless you accept the definition. Daniel and his parents had tried to make me small with context, money, and social choreography. All they had actually done was introduce themselves accurately. "What do I do now?" Lauren asked. That is the question at the center of most ruined evenings. Not what happened, not who was wrong. What do I do now? I looked out at the Broadway traffic, at the blur of red taillights and storefront reflections on wet pavement. "You go home somewhere else tonight," I said. "You sleep without letting anyone talk you into an earlier version of reality. And tomorrow, if you still need the answer, you ask yourself whether this was a surprise or a confirmation." She did not respond immediately. When she did, her voice was steadier. "That's not a small question." "No," I said. "It's the right one." Another pause. Then, "Thank you for not destroying him." I considered that. Keeping a man in his chair after he's shown why he doesn't deserve the next one isn't mercy alone, I said. Sometimes it's instruction. "That sounds like you." "It sounds like accounting," I said, and that finally made her laugh for real, brief and tired and human. I smiled into the dark windshield. "Call me tomorrow," I told her. "I will." She hesitated. "Dad?" "Yes?" "I'm sorry he made you sit through that." I closed my eyes for one moment. "I know." When the call ended, I sat there a little longer before starting the engine. I thought about Daniel at the table, face drained, finally understanding that power had been present all along and had chosen not to speak first. I thought about Richard's hand lifting off the envelope, about Evelyn's pearls and her shrinking certainty, about Lauren leaving with her marriage rearranged inside her whether she stayed in it or not. Then I started the Toyota, eased out into traffic, and let Broadway slide behind me. Some men think wealth proves itself through noise, through names on buildings, through watches, cars, bottle service, and the nervous need to be recognized in every room they enter. I have never believed that. Money is useful. Ownership is leverage. Status is sometimes a tool. But none of them reveal character as clearly as silence does. Let people misread you long enough, and eventually they confess themselves. Wealth is loudest when it refuses to speak first. The next morning, before most of Manhattan had finished its first coffee, I was already at my desk, with the overnight reports stacked neatly to the left of my keyboard and Daniel Whitaker's personnel file open on the screen in front of me. I do not make consequential decisions in anger. Anger is expensive. Precision is cheaper. At 8:10, Martin Hale stepped into my office, shut the door behind him, and took the chair opposite mine without a word. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. He never entered a room trying to perform usefulness. He simply arrived useful. "You meant it?" he asked. "About the freeze?" "Yes." He nodded once. "HR has the hold in place. No announcement, no paperwork released." I slid the file toward the edge of the desk. "Good. Daniel keeps his role. He loses the promotion track until further notice." Martin studied me for a second. "Performance issue?" "Character issue," I said. "That becomes a performance issue the moment authority increases." Martin understood at once. Men who have sat near real power long enough learn that temperament is not a soft variable. It is infrastructure. "Do you want it documented formally?" he asked. "No family details, no dinner, no envelope. Keep it to executive judgment regarding readiness for advancement." "Understood." He stood to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth, sir, if he was foolish enough to treat you badly before knowing who you were, the problem isn't ambition, it's instincts." Exactly. When he left, I sat there for another minute, looking at Daniel's 10 years at Mercer Allied Systems, reduced to bullet points, bonuses, evaluations, presentation wins, leadership scores, retention metrics, all the tidy measurements corporations use to pretend they can quantify a human being. None of those pages showed the steakhouse on Broadway. None of them showed the cream envelope, the $5,000, or the way his face drained when Martin said, "Yes, sir."
But that was the difficulty with modern management. Competence often photographs better than character.
Around 9:40, my assistant told me Daniel was downstairs asking whether I would see him. I considered the question for perhaps 2 seconds. "Send him up." He entered without the polish he usually wore to internal meetings. No blazer today. No Mercer logo on the pocket. Grey suit, wrinkled at one sleeve. Eyes red-rimmed. Not from drink, I thought, but from the kind of night a man spends discovering that shame is louder in a quiet house than in a crowded restaurant. He closed the door gently behind him and remained standing until I pointed to the chair. "Sit." He sat. His hands came together, then apart, then together again. He had not prepared well enough for this room, because all his preparation had belonged to the version of me he thought he knew. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that doesn't cover it." "No," I said, "it doesn't." He swallowed. "Lauren stayed with a friend last night." I gave no response. He had not come for sympathy. He knew that. "I didn't sleep," he said. "Good," I answered. "That means something reached you." He flinched slightly, then nodded as though he had expected nothing softer. I was ashamed the moment I understood what I'd done. "No," I said. "You were ashamed the moment you understood who I was." That landed hard. I watched him absorb it, because accuracy is often the first real punishment. "You're right," he said after a moment. "At least at first." He looked down at his hands. "But after I kept hearing everything I'd said to you over the years, every joke, every stupid comment, every time I made you smaller to make myself look bigger." I let the silence do its work. He continued, voice lower now. "My father always taught me that perception is leverage, that if you don't define a room, someone else will define you. I think I started believing that if a person looked ordinary, they were ordinary. If they didn't announce value, they probably didn't have any." "And now?" I asked. He gave one bitter little laugh, dry and exhausted. "Now I think I'm the kind of man who needed a phone call to learn basic respect. That's the first honest thing you've said in my office." He nodded slowly. "Martin told me the promotion is frozen." "It is." "For how long?" "Long enough." He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "Am I fired?" "No." His expression shifted, not to relief exactly, but to confusion. "Why not?" "Because immediate ruin would let you turn yourself into a victim. I'm not giving you that exit." He sat very still after that. The building outside my office windows threw back the late morning sun in clean white angles. Below us, the city moved as if no one anywhere had ever offered $5,000 to erase the wrong man. "You keep your job," I said. "You lose the promotion. You rebuild whatever can still be rebuilt through conduct, not apology tours. You do not mention my ownership to anyone as leverage, explanation, or self-defense. You do not speak about your wife's family as though we are an optics problem in your career path. And your parents are finished with company events. Completely. Is any part of that unclear?" "No." "Good." He looked like he wanted to ask something else, then finally did. "Did Lauren know about you owning Mercer?" "Not all of it at first. Enough of it later. And she never told me. She was protecting the one thing you could have proven without the information." He understood that too, or at least he had suffered enough in 12 hours to recognize the outline of it. "She won't answer my calls," he said quietly. "That is not a corporate matter," I replied. "No, sir." He caught the word the instant it left his mouth. So did I. But neither of us commented on it. Some things do not need to be underlined when they have already been carved in deep enough. He stood after a moment, slower than he had sat down. "I am sorry," he said again. "Not because you own the company, because I was the kind of man who thought your silence made you safe to disrespect." I believed that sentence more than the first one. Not fully, not enough to trust him, but enough to know the crack in his self-image was now real. Whether that matters, I said, depends on what you do next when there is no audience. He nodded. Then he left my office the way humbled people often do, carefully, as if noise itself might count against them. 2 days later, Lauren came by the house. No warning, just her car in the drive a little after 4, and her knock at the kitchen door like she was 16 again and checking whether she was early for dinner. I was making tea. She came in, tired, beautiful, stripped of illusion in a way that made her seem both older and more like the child I used to carry half asleep from the couch to bed. We sat at the table with the late light coming through the window, and for a while we spoke about ordinary things because grief sometimes needs a small hallway before it can enter the room properly. Finally, she set the cup down and said, "I'm staying with Nora for a while." I nodded once. "All right. He came to see you, didn't he?" "Yes." "Did you destroy him?" "No." She let out the faintest smile. "That's how I knew." I waited. "He told me you kept his job," she said. "He cried when he said it." "That surprises you?" "A little." I looked out toward the yard. "It doesn't surprise me that a man cries after finding out the floor he was standing on belonged to the person he mocked. It surprises me he didn't think harder before the dinner." Lauren rubbed one thumb against the side of her cup. "I keep replaying the last 6 years, trying to figure out whether I missed it or whether I kept translating it into something smaller because I didn't want to know." "Most people don't miss what hurts them," I said. "They just keep renegotiating the meaning until the truth becomes unavoidable." She sat with that for a while. Then she asked the question I suspected had been waiting in her all day. "Do you think people like that can change?" I took my time before answering. "Yes," I said, "but not because they got caught. Only because they've finally become unable to admire the person they've been." She looked down. "And if they still admire him?" "Then they simply get better at hiding." That one made her eyes shine, but she held steady. "I don't know what I'm going to do yet." "You don't have to know today." "I know." She gave a tired little laugh. "You and your patience." "It's not patience," I said. "It's sequencing. First truth, then choice." She reached across the table and took my hand, the way she used to when she was small and wanted reassurance without admitting fear. "Thank you for coming that night," she said. "Even now." I squeezed her fingers once. "You never have to thank me for showing up for you." When she left, the house was quiet again in the old, familiar way. I washed the cups, dried them, put them back in the cabinet, and stood for a minute at the sink looking at my own reflection in the darkening glass. Age does one useful thing if you let it. It teaches you that vindication is overrated. People imagine revenge as heat, spectacle, the thrilling collapse of someone who underestimated you. But most of the time, real consequence is administrative, private, and slow. A promotion withheld, a marriage paused, a daughter seeing clearly, a father from Connecticut realizing there are rooms where his money and posture cannot buy the ending he expected. Daniel would go on. Lauren would decide what remained possible, if anything. Mercer Allied Systems would continue opening its doors every morning, payroll running on time, meetings beginning at 9, reports filed, budgets reviewed. All the machinery of a company moving forward, whether or not one arrogant man had mistaken the owner for a burden. And I would go on too, still wearing plain shirts, still driving the Toyota, still eating in places where no one thinks to ask who owns what. Because the older I get, the less interest I have in proving myself to people who only respect volume. Let them assume, let them measure, let them slide their little envelopes across polished tables and call it wisdom. In the end, what they reveal is never your value, only their own.